Good evening. I'm Joe Nye, Dean of the Kennedy School, and on behalf of the Institute of Politics and the entire Kennedy School community, I want to welcome you to tonight's forum. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Student Advisory Committee, the Harvard Republican Club, and the Kennedy School Republican Caucus. We're especially honored to have Senator McCain here. It'll be his first public address at the forum, and we're just pleased that this will be round one on campaign finance reform. Last summer, the New York Times in a profile described Senator McCain as something of an endangered species, a politician who lived dangerously by speaking his mind. And the same article reported a Times CBS poll that showed while 90% of the American electorate believes that money is corrupting politics, only 23% expect Congress to do anything about it. Senator McCain is once again the politician who's the exception to the rule, with a bipartisan effort. I might add a personal note, which is that a few years ago when I was up for confirmation by the Senate, I was making the routine courtesy calls, which are part of the drill. Most senators were busy. It was a polite, short, cordial conversation, and then you were on to the next office. Except in one office, where I lingered because the conversation on American defense policy and the role of the Congress was so thoughtful that I found it one of the most interesting conversations I had in Washington. The senator was busy, but he took the time to go into great detail about larger questions, and you wouldn't be surprised that that senator was John McCain. One person who would not have been surprised by that experience I had with John McCain is Sheila Burke. Sheila is often known as the 101st Senator. She's now the Executive Dean of the Kennedy School after a very distinguished career on Capitol Hill, where from 1977 to 96 she worked for Majority Leader Senator Bob Dole, and during the last 10 years as his Chief of Staff. Sheila is a nurse by training, and she has become and was, still is, one of America's most respected voices on health care reform. Her association with the Kennedy School, though, goes back before her recent arrival as Executive Dean. She is a graduate of the Kennedy School with a master's degree in public administration. And we're delighted to have her here as our Executive Dean, and since she knows more about Senator McCain and the Senate than I ever will, she will introduce Senator McCain tonight. Please welcome Sheila Burke.
Thank you very much. In America, we celebrate the virtues of the quiet hero, the modest man who does his duty without complaint or expectation of praise, the man who listens closely for the call of his country, and when she calls, he answers without reservation, not for fame or reward, but for love, because he loves his country. So began John McCain's nomination speech of Bob Dole at the Republican Convention in 1996. Those words used to describe his friend, the senator from Kansas, could easily describe the man that we have with us this evening. It has been said that most senators start out as junior class presidents and work their way up to the state legislature, or a Senate staff, or maybe to the House. Tonight's speaker had a somewhat different path to the position that he holds today. Yes, he served in the House for 4 years before being elected to the Senate in 1986, but his early life was far different from that of many of his colleagues. He was born into a family with a grand military tradition. The son and grandson of admirals, he was the third generation to attend the Naval Academy, where he describes himself as having set some sort of record for incurring the wrath of the authorities. A skill I have to say he's continued to exhibit even today, as evidenced by his somewhat testy relations with some of his colleagues at times. He credits his distinguished family and his military service, which led to his receipt of the Silver Star, Legion of Merit, the Purple Heart, and the Distinguished Flying Cross, as having helped him form the strong convictions that he holds today. First among them was his belief that serving his country was an honor. For 5.5 years, McCain was a prisoner of war. He refused offers of freedom in keeping with the code of conduct for American military. The 1995 book, The Nightingale Song, chronicled his bravery as well as his spunk in adopting what could only be described as a wise-ass approach to his interrogators. At the time of the book's release, McCain said that his refusal of an early release gave him the confidence that once he'd examined something, he would know what was right and would hold to that position even when it didn't receive the approval of those around him. No one who knows him ever questioned that statement. He is viewed by both sides of the political aisle as direct, forthright, and even blunt at times, traits that some of his colleagues find difficult. But no one questions his word or the strength of his views or his willingness to be bipartisan. He is a man of strong convictions. He is a man who never shies away from a battle, even when the battle is of epic proportions. Like David to Goliath, he takes on giants. They said it couldn't be done, but the line-item veto was enacted largely as a result of Senator McCain. The repeal of catastrophic health insurance, the subject of one of our own case studies here at the Kennedy School, was almost entirely a result of his work. The continuing battle over congressional pork has earned him the ire of his colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And perhaps the most challenging task he undertook was the one given him by the Dole campaign team, to sit in the front row at the presidential debates and try and make Dole smile. And he did. It was quite successful. Of course, the most recent and well-publicized giant he has taken on is our system of financing political campaigns. To put it simply, he wants it changed. It could happen with tomorrow's vote, but if it doesn't, be assured that Senator McCain will be back, as I'm sure he will tell us tonight. Let me close with one final excerpt from a recent speech that Senator McCain gave, and I quote, "The most enduring truth I learned was that honor was not synonymous with public acclaim. Virtue is not determined in moments of public attention to our behavior. Courage, devotion, humility, and compassion, all noble qualities of humanity. They are not practiced in pursuit of public approval. They are the means to much nobler ends, and they are ends in themselves. Character," said a 19th century evangelist, "is what you are in the dark." Whether seen in the dark or in the bright light of day, John McCain is such a man. Please join me in welcoming the senior senator from Arizona.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sheila. There's an old line of Harry Truman's that I'm sure you have heard many times, that if you want a friend in Washington, go out and buy a dog. And Harry Truman was right. But I not only consider Sheila a dear friend, but a person of enormous capability, capacity. With her service with Senator Dole, it had enormous impact on the legislative process and America, and I'm very happy to call her a friend. And at some point on a later date, I will mention that our relationship was not always thus, that we had some differences of opinion from time to time, but our differences were always spirited, but also respectful. Joe, thank you for your kind words, but also thank you for your service to our nation. You did an outstanding job, and we're very grateful. We need more people like you who are willing to serve and move back and forth in various arenas in American life. And of course, Graham Allison is here somewhere, or was, and Graham, we certainly appreciated the opportunity of knowing you, and it's nice to see a number of old friends again. I'm very grateful that you would invite me to talk with serious students of politics about what I think is wrong with politics in America today and what we can do to remedy these problems. I promise not to speak too long so that I'll have ample time to enjoy the privilege of listening to your questions and comments or insults. Before I begin, I'd like to address one particular question about my own political future, which to my embarrassment, I'm often asked about these days. Tonight I'd like to clear up any ambiguity in my earlier answers by using this distinguished forum to announce a very important career decision which I and my wife, Cindy, have just made. After long and careful consideration, Cindy and I have decided that I will not seek, nor will I accept, the nomination to be the United States Ambassador to Mexico. Jesse Helms says I can run for governor of Massachusetts, perhaps I might do that. I want to begin tonight by talking about legislation, so-called landmark legislation, which was passed by the last Congress. I refer to the telecommunications bill, which was loudly praised by its supporters for deregulating the fastest-growing industry in America, opening it to greater competition and providing more choices and lower prices to the American consumer. I am an ardent deregulator, but I was one of 2 Republican members of the Commerce Committee to vote against that bill. I did so for one simple reason. It didn't deregulate anything. It was re-regulation by another name. The Senate Commerce Committee had held lengthy hearings on the bill. We took testimony from every single entity which could possibly be affected by the legislation, save one, the American consumer. Every commercial telecommunications interest, armed with a full complement of lobbyists, got a respectful hearing from the members of the committee. Not surprisingly, lawmakers drafting the legislation reversed the primary purpose of the bill from deregulation to protecting every commercial interest in the industry. That such a task is impossible did not daunt the sponsors of the bill. The end result was a bill which encouraged huge mergers, discouraged the entry of local carriers into the long-distance market, and made it more difficult for telephone companies to offer wireless cable services. In short, the bill discouraged competition. It didn't create jobs, and it gave the consumer fewer, not more choices. It did, however, help raise telephone and cable rates. When we deregulated the airline industry, we abolished the Civil Aviation Board. When we pretended to deregulate the telecommunications industry, we strengthened the Federal Communications Commission. Just a few pages of legislation were turned into thousands of pages of new FCC regulations. My friends, free enterprise, like all freedoms, doesn't mean everybody wins. Freedom entails risks, but politicians have grown risk-averse. Freedom, especially if the risks include a loss of political support from generous campaign donors. Our dependence on ever-rising levels of financial support from an ever-growing list of donors has robbed us of the courage of our convictions. That's a shame. It's a shame because our politics are deprived of the enrichment of great debates, and heroics are absent from our political history, and our nation's progress is obstructed. Compromise is necessary in politics. That's a good thing. I do not believe it wise to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but compromise should serve to advance our concept of the national good. It should not defeat the very principles that brought us to the bargaining table in the first place. For example, over the 10-year period I fought for the line item veto, there were a number of compromises made. We would not compromise on the principle of a 2/3 vote to override. The President today exercised his line item veto. It was what we wanted, and now obviously some legislators are complaining as their pork barrel projects are rejected. If our purpose was to deregulate the telecommunications industry to the maximum extent possible, and compromises had to be made along the way, fine. I can't justify a political process that reverses our direction completely and that substitutes the goal of deregulation with its antithesis. Not every interest would have prevailed in a genuinely deregulated industry. Some companies would have failed, some jobs would have been lost, but a greater number of jobs would have been created in those companies that thrived, and American consumers would have had the greater array of choices and the lower costs we falsely promised them. In short, the nation would have progressed. We lost sight of that purpose, however, and we did so because we thought it safer to sacrifice the national interest than offend some special interests. Why? Maybe those interests were major employers in our states. Maybe those with shareholders were a large constituency in our districts. And maybe those interests were important sources of campaign revenue. Please do not think I attribute every congressional failure to political fundraising. I do not. There are other reasons and concerns that keep us timid. There are other risks that intimidate us. But the race to amass campaign treasuries ranks high among our concerns, and that is evidence in many of the laws that we pass. Every politician knows it, and more importantly, the people know it. Most Americans believe that their elected officials have no greater priority than their own reelection. Most Americans believe that every one of us, whether we publicly advocate or publicly oppose campaign finance reform, is working either openly or deceitfully to prevent even the slightest repair to a system that the people believe is corrupt. Most Americans believe that all of us conspire to hold on to every single political advantage we have, lest we jeopardize our incumbency by a single lost vote. I am a conservative, and I believe it's a very healthy thing for Americans to be skeptical about the purposes and practices of public officials and refrain from expecting too much from their government. Self-reliance is the ethic that made America great, not consigning personal responsibilities to the state. I believe in small government, but I do not believe that we're chasing an idealized form of anarchy. Government is intended to support our constitutional purposes, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. When the people come to believe government is so dysfunctional, so corrupt that it no longer serves these ends, basic civil consensus will suffer grave harm, and our culture will be fragmented beyond recognition. I am a conservative, and I believe that a conservative's primary purpose in public life is to give Americans a government that is less removed in style and substance from the people, and to help restore the public faith in an America that is greater than the sum of its special interests. That is the purpose of the gift ban Congress adopted. That is the purpose of the new restrictions Congress imposed on lobbyists. That is the purpose of applying to Congress the laws we impose on businesses, and that, I contend, is the purpose of campaign finance reform. We should not enter public life for the perks and privileges, for the salary, or for the thrill of being called senator. Those attractions are not worth the strain on our families, the long hours, and the public abuse we pay for the privilege. Our purpose should be our country's welfare, not our own. The opponents of reform note that they have stood for re-election and won with their opposition on full public display. Therefore, they argue, the people don't really care about reform. But that is because the people do not believe that either the candidate opposing reform or the candidate advocating reform will honestly work to change the system once he or she has been elected under the rules that presently govern it. They distrust both. They believe that the system is so thoroughly riddled with financial temptation that it corrupts us all. The opponents argue the people are content. I believe the people are alienated, and this explains why fewer and fewer of them bother to vote. This problem should motivate all public officials to repair both the appearance and the reality of government corruption. Whether great numbers of office holders are in fact bribed by campaign contributions to cast votes contrary to the national interest is not the single standard for determining the need for reform, although it would be hard to find much legislation enacted by Congress that did not contain one or more obscure provision that served no identifiable national or even a local community interest. I entered politics with some of the same expectations I had when I was commissioned an ensign in the Navy. First among them was my belief that serving my country was an honor, indeed, the most honorable life an American can lead. I believe that still. Regrettably, many Americans do not. I am honored to serve in the company of many good men and women whose public and private virtue deserves to be above reproach. But we are reproached by the people to whom we are accountable. We are reproached because the system in which we are elected is so awash in money that the people cannot help but suspect that all our service is tainted by it. If most Americans feel they have sufficient cause to doubt our integrity, then we must seek all reasonable means to persuade them otherwise. Reform of our campaign finance laws is indispensable to that end. As long as the wealthiest among us can make six-figure contributions to political parties and gain the special access to power such generosity confers on the donor, most Americans will dismiss even the most virtuous politicians' claim of patriotism. Who can blame them when they are overwhelmed by evidence that political representation in America is measured on a sliding scale? The more you give, the more you can petition your government. A Native American tribe wants to recover its lost lands? Pay up. The government will hear you. You want to build a pipeline across Central Asia? Pay up. The president will discuss it with you. If you seek spiritual communion with the vice president, have your clergy abandon their vow of poverty and pay up. But if all you pay are your taxes, send us a letter. We'll send you one back. This is a dark view of my profession, and I do not believe it fairly represents us. But we cannot blame the people for thinking otherwise when they're treated to the spectacle of access peddling that assaulted them in the last election, and when they are told repeatedly that campaign contributions are the only means through which they can seek redress from their government. The people have come to believe that we are all merely selling subway tokens to the government gravy train. The opponents of reform claim there isn't too much money in politics. They argue there's not enough. They observe that more money is spent to advertise toothpaste and yogurt than is spent on our elections. But we aren't selling toothpaste and yogurt to the people. We are offering our integrity and our principles, and the means we use to tender that offer should not cause the consumer to doubt the value of the product. Tomorrow, the Senate may dispose of this issue for the time being. It may dispose of this issue without a recorded vote, up or down, on the reform bill Senator Feingold and I have proposed. We may have a vote to table an amendment which is intended to kill the legislation. We may have a cloture vote to cut off a filibuster. We may have two cloture votes. But right now, it doesn't look like senators will be obliged to vote yea or nay on campaign finance reform. I hope this is not the case, but it very well may be. Of course, all these parliamentary tactics are intended to kill campaign finance reform. There's no doubt of that. But they're also intended to make it look like the other side killed it. Not all opponents of reform have the courage to stand up, denounce reform, and vote against it directly. Some do, but most don't. Many opponents have a nagging concern that the people, at least some people, will resent their opposition. In truth, my friends, not all of the support in the Senate for our bill is genuine. There are people on both sides of the aisle, whether they publicly support or oppose reform, whose chief purpose is to see it killed by their political opponents. The practice of politics can often be a very cynical endeavor. The press, with its editorial support for reform, will denounce the death of the bill. But I assure you, they will creep into the media's coverage of the event some grudging admiration for the tactics used to kill reform and frame the other side of the murder. That's too bad. No one should be congratulated. Neither the victors nor the vanquished will have covered themselves in glory. I and other supporters of reform will deserve criticism for failure. The honest opponents will deserve criticism for doing the nation a disservice. And the clandestine enemies of reform should receive a good share of the criticism because it is they who will have done the most to deepen the people's cynicism about the integrity of their government. Sadly, if the past is any guide, they will escape. But we will all, reform supporters and reform opponents, continue to dwell in the low regard of the people we serve. I have some hope that events will turn out better than the gloomy forecast I've offered. Some senators who have yet to endorse our legislation are working to find some compromise that may move us down the road a little. Some of the opponents may have begun to feel a little more public pressure than they had anticipated. The odds are long, but not impossible. In truth, reforms will not be made until most of us believe that opposing reform is more dangerous to our incumbency than enacting it. Toward that end, Senator Feingold and I will keep pressing our case, even if we fail tomorrow. We will offer a ban on soft money to whatever legislation is next considered by the Senate. And we'll keep offering it on vehicle after vehicle until it receives an up or down vote. And senators are obliged to stand by their conviction openly. The people should be able to render a judgment without needing to sort through the obfuscation that's used to confuse them. And any other course on our part would be dishonorable. When I was a young man, I responded aggressively and often irresponsibly to anyone who questioned my honor. I'm not a young man now, and while, as Sheila can attest, I've often been known to occasionally forget the discretion which is expected of a person of my years and station, I lack both the will and the ability to address attacks upon my reputation in the manner I once addressed them. I remember how zealously a boy attended the needs of his self-respect. But as I grew older and the challenges to my self-respect grew more varied, I discovered that while my sense of honor had matured, its defense mattered even more than it did when I believed any empty challenge threatened it. Now I find myself faced with a popular challenge to the honor of a profession of which I am a proud member. It is imperative that we do all we can to address the causes of the people's contempt. Meaningful campaign finance reform will not cure public cynicism about modern politics, nor will it completely free politics from influence selling. But together with other reforms, it may prevent cynicism from becoming utter alienation. As Americans begin to see their elected representatives value their reputations more than their incumbency, I hope it would even encourage more Americans to seek public office, not for the honorifics bestowed on election winners, but for the honor of serving a great nation. We must not fear to take risks for our country. We must not value the privileges of power so highly that we use our power unfairly and subordinate the country's interest to our personal ambitions. We may think we trade on America's good name to stay in office and polish the luster of our professional reputations, but the people's growing disdain for us is a stain upon our honor, and that is an injury which none of us should suffer quietly. Thank you very much.
There are 4 microphones on either side and up above, and if you would identify yourself when you ask your question, and we'll move around.
Yes, my name is Mariah Starr. I'm a junior at the college, and I hail from Tucson, Arizona. I must
You
say,
get so far from home.
yes, I am. I must say, it is nice to see one of Arizona's representatives more respectable than our previous governor, and advocate something that's right and good. And I know that you aren't going to run for the ambassadorship of Mexico, but what about the presidency?
Well, thank you for that question. It was planted from Arizona. Just a couple of comments. One is that in Arizona, we had Barry Goldwater run for president. We had Morris Udall run for president. We had Bruce Babbitt run for president. Arizona may be the only state in America where mothers can't tell their children that someday they can grow up and be president of the United States. The other line that I want to use on occasion is that if you're a United States Senator, unless you're under indictment or detoxification, you automatically consider yourself a candidate for President of the United States. I'm running for re-election in the Senate. I don't think it's fair to the people of Arizona for me to be doing both at the same time. And after the 1998 elections, then I would sit down and consider the options. But I would point out that there is a certain element to this candidacy that would have some difficulties, and I'll give you 2 examples. One, as you know, the Iowa caucuses are the first caucus. I not only opposed but proposed an amendment to kill the ethanol subsidies, which I think benefits neither consumer nor the environment. And also I am in strong opposition to the so-called English-only proposition that seems to be very popular in some parts of New Hampshire. And so, so I think it would be a difficult task, but I cannot say that I wouldn't do such a thing. I have no PAC, I have no organization, I have none of the things that go along with that. But thank you for the question.
Thank you.
My name is Jeremy Bash. I'm in the law school. ABC News tonight reported that you were in compromise negotiations with Senator Snowe about the union dues issue and the so-called poison pill issue. I was wondering if you'd comment on that.
Senator Snowe and other senators are concerned about having this issue die. and she has been in negotiations with Senator Lott and other senators and with me. I admire Senator Snowe a great deal, as I do Senator Collins, both senators from Maine. And I'm hopeful that we could reach some agreement. I think that there is, to be honest with you, I think as people are feeling the pressure for campaign finance reform, I think the American people are beginning to correspond with their elected representatives that there are serious attempts at trying to reach something that we can all agree on. And let me just point out one other point here. Russ Feingold and I do not have the perfect solution. There are 87 different campaign finance reform bills that have been introduced in the Congress. Interesting. And we have said to every one of those, look, if you got a better idea, let's sit down and discuss it and agree. Our proposal is not engraved in golden tablets. We want to work with everybody, and I hope that we can see some motion in that direction, but I'm not overly confident at this point, but I'm glad that there is some motion, and I will not give up, as I mentioned. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Senator McCain, I'd like to really thank you for taking the lead on this issue. I'm a student at the Kennedy School, and actually I spent some of the time during the summer petitioning for your bill. And I wanted to ask...
God bless you, boy.
I wanted
Great
to ask you, I
American.
think it's a great first step, but I'm not sure that even if McCain-Feingold passes, it will be enough, and whether campaign finance reform can really happen without full expenditure limits, as some have proposed. And I would ask you if you're in favor of those someday, and knowing that those have been ruled unconstitutional, how you stand on that issue.
Sure, and I'll try and keep my answer shorter than this, but you asked a very difficult question, one we've been wrestling with. Clearly, I think it's clear that the United States Supreme Court has says you cannot impose spending limits. But the United States Supreme Court has also not said that you can't impose contribution limits. That's why no one has ever challenged the $1,000 individual contribution in the primary and the general. And the soft money, believe me, my friends, if you believe one thing that I say tonight, do not believe those people that say that soft money has always been a part of politics. It has not. It is a recent explosion. It has quadrupled since the 1992 election. It is a loophole that was found and then exploited by a court decision, a Colorado decision. It has exploded exponentially. And that, in my view, is the major problem. Now, your point is that, as some very wise person said, that money in politics is like water, it'll flow through any crack. And you're exactly right. We have seen that throughout our history. And that's why we think it's so important to have the bright line on the independent campaign, which says that you can't mention someone's name or show their face in the last 60 days of a campaign in a, quote, independent campaign. Remember, you can still spend all the hard money, the $1,000 limited contribution you want to, and you can attack John McCain as long as you want. But you can't do what we saw the most outrageous manifestations of in the last campaign is all the money goes to the independent, so-called independent campaigns. The candidate has no control of it. They're all negative campaigns. They're all negative attacks. And then, of course, politicians are astonished that we're held in low esteem by the American people after this barrage of negative ads. So I think that spending limits would be very hard to impose without a amendment to the Constitution of the United States. We all know how hard that is, and so I don't view it as a practicality. And the other thing I would say, if we could make some progress on this issue and prove to the politicians that it doesn't mean the end of their incumbency if we enact some modest reform. Perhaps they would then say, well, you know, maybe these reforms are good. I've met the approval of my constituents because we're moving forward and making progress on this. And so that's why we think that perhaps a step-by-step sort of approach would work. I apologize for the long answer, but when you think these things through, as obviously you have, we got to remember that it's the art of the possible, but also we need to win one. We need to have a victory which I think would meet the overwhelming approval of the incumbents' constituents. And remember one other thing. Republicans and Democrats are both scared to death about the disappearance of soft money. And the reason why is obvious. Why not raise money in $50,000 and $100,000 chunks instead of the maximum of $1,000 chunk? And you know the impact of that is? We don't see any more barbecues. We don't see any more political rallies. You don't see the $5 and $10 contributors. You don't see the door-to-door campaigning anymore. All you see is buying a whole bunch of campaign ads on television, and that's the campaign. And that isn't what campaigns should be all about for a whole lot of obvious reasons. I apologize for the long answer. I will make my following answers much shorter. Thank you for the question. Thank you for your service. You did the Lord's work, my boy.
Thank you.
Good evening, Senator. My name is Eugenie Lang, and I'm a sophomore at the college. And I was wondering how large a role you think these honorifics that you're speaking about play in the reasons for serving of most of your colleagues, not only in Congress, but throughout politics, and how strongly would you venture to comment on the motives of those who either quietly or vocally are opposing your bill?
I believe that the overwhelming majority of the men and women that I've been privileged to serve with are dedicated public servants, and I will not change that view, and I think the worst thing that I can do is impugn their motives. Too often we see political debate degenerate into an impugning of motives, which then leads to character attacks, which then leads to a degeneration of the process. You know, one observation I've made several times. I can disagree with a colleague of mine about an issue, and it'll be over in a few hours, especially when you get as old as I'm getting. But if you insult one of your colleagues or impugn their motives or their characters, it's a long, long, long time before that's over. And there's going to be other battles that I have to fight after this issue is resolved, and I'm going to have to work with my colleagues. Product liability reform is a huge issue that we need to take up, and we need to take it up soon. And I've got to work with a lot of these guys and women that I'm in ferocious debate with on the floor now. So I think overall, the people I serve with, most of them are a lot smarter than I am. They're much better educated. They are, no, I don't want to insult the Naval Academy like that. They're well-educated people, and I think that they're dedicated to their work. I really believe that. But I also have to say in all candor, otherwise I would not be completely honest with you, they're also dedicated to staying in office, okay? They're dedicated to staying in office. I think we all realize that. And in a way, there's nothing wrong with that, as long it's not unseemly and unfair. And that's why this system has grown into both of those. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Good evening, Senator. My name is Jacqueline Newmeyer. I'm a freshman from Washington, D.C., and I was wondering about your reaction to Attorney General Reno's letter earlier this week absolving the president.
I admire and respect and like Attorney General Reno. I think she's a wonderful person. I am deeply concerned and somewhat saddened about this continuous series of events which lead her to make a statement or come to a conclusion publicly, and then that is repudiated by later events. Example, the president and the vice president didn't violate any laws because all of the money they raised was soft money, which does not fall under federal election laws. I found that a curious interpretation of the law, but that was her decision. And then we find out within days, thanks to Bob Woodward, not to the Katz and Jammer kids that are over there at the Justice Department, that they must have Inspector Clouseau running that one. And we find out, thanks to Bob Woodward, that indeed a lot of that soft money was hard money, and thanks to him. Then again, we see a very curious coincidence, and perhaps it is coincidence, in the last couple of days. The Attorney General of the United States says that she is not going to pursue any investigation or the process, this 30-day, 60, 90-day process that they go through, because she has examined completely the fundraising of the president and has looked at all the evidence, and so therefore there was no reason to move forward, but she may with the vice president. Well then, Time magazine breaks the story, which is on the newsstand today, that there are videotapes which were not made available to either the Justice Department or Senator Thompson's committee. And by the way, Senator Thompson asked for all evidence and all documents pertaining to fundraising back in July. Now, maybe you find folders on the First Lady's table, and maybe I know the White House is a big place. I've admired it often. I've examined it carefully. But the fact is that to not have sent over those videotapes much earlier on, and now what's happening to Attorney General Reno is they're saying, wait a minute, you reached a conclusion and stated this, you'd examined all the evidence. Now here's additional evidence. So I guess my answer is that I'm worried not only about a good and decent person, which Attorney General Reno is, but I'm worried about the integrity of the Justice Department. It chills my blood when I hear that an employee, a high-ranking employee of the CIA, calls and intervenes for political reasons to get Mr. Tamraz into the White House. The CIA should never be involved in anything like that. That's the agency that we give special powers and privileges to, as you know, for purposes that they carry out for national security. So, as I said, I'm worried about the reputation of the Justice Department. I do not call for the impeachment of Ms. Reno. I think that's reckless, nor do I call for her resignation. I don't think that's appropriate or fair. But I do hope that they get things on track and we get all the information before the American people, let the chips fall where they may, and move it forward.
What about an independent counsel?
Clearly they need an independent counsel. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think we passed that point a long time ago. And the longer there is the delay, the more I'm afraid Ms. Reno's reputation is harmed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Good evening. My name is David Hochschild, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I have to be honest, there's not a whole lot of Republicans that I could imagine voting for, but you're one of them, Senator. And
I hope you don't get to know me.
No, actually, I think that you are one of the most principled people in Washington, D.C., and I hope you stay there for a long time. And I come from a family of longtime Democrats who I don't think would be very happy to hear me say that, so let's keep that in this room. My question is this. I think many of us who are here tonight are concerned about campaign finance reform because of the effects that it will have on voter apathy and turning around this very troublesome trend of disengagement in America today. And so in the event that your bill does not pass this week, what is it that you would have us, the people who care about government and America, do to help you to make it pass in the future?
Oh, could I, before I answer your question, could I comment on the presence of another man of decency and integrity in the room who I have had the privilege of working with on a number of issues, and I've said publicly and will say repeatedly, we would not have normalized relations with Vietnam if it had not been for the work of Senator John Kerry, a dear friend of mine. Thank you, John, for stopping by. And when you get an opportunity, I'd like you all to stop by and visit that low-income tract home that he's living in Georgetown today. Please be sure and stop by. It's a modest place. My answer, sir, is that old line of Winston Churchill's: never, ever, 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 ever give up. When it's an issue, if you feel, as I do, and I know John shares my view, that the very nature of our whole government and democracy and the adherence to those principles of our founding fathers will survive, then I think we just cannot allow this one to pass by. So, again, I want to emphasize, and I've probably said this a number of times already, but I want to say this again. It is the outside pressure from constituents that will make incumbents vote to change a system that keeps incumbents in office, okay? That's the only thing. My eloquence and charm, John's, will not do the job. It will be when the constituent, when the senator or congressman comes home and the constituent comes up to him in the street and says, I'm not voting for you again unless you clean up this mess. That's when I think it's going to happen. And it isn't people like me that are going to get it done. It's people like you and the young man who was up there earlier. Thanks very much. And I'd like you to remember the words of Chairman Mao, who said, it's always darkest before it's totally black.
Mr. Senator, both you and Senator Kerry are great war heroes, and I'd like to know how both of you, or you in particular, would respond to the fact that universities like Harvard, despite the fact that they take millions of dollars a year from the federal government, do not allow on-campus military recruiting.
First of all, could I mention to you that it doesn't take a lot of talent to get shot down. I was able to intercept a surface-to-air missile with my own airplane, which was Robert Strange McNamara's way of winning the Vietnam War, as you know. I don't agree with it, and I think that it should be allowed, and it's my view, but I do not also believe that the government should force such an action on an institution, this one or other, but I obviously believe that it's wrong not to recruit young men and women here. I'm proud that the finest young men and women in America serve in the military, and I would like to have the people that are on this campus to have that same opportunity.
Thank you.
Senator, my name is Charles McLaughlin. I'm a graduate student in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences across the road. And a week ago tonight, I attended a lively and enlightening discussion on race and racism in America at the Harvard Law School, based on Professor Randall Kennedy's thought-provoking article in the Atlantic Monthly entitled My Race Problem and Yours. It seemed that most members of the audience identified conservatives and Republicans as the allies of racists in America and allies of the worst aspects of the racial status quo. How do you respond to this critique? And what do you, as a conservative, think the federal government should or should not do to ensure that the disadvantaged of any race have the economic and social ability to exercise the freedoms we all cherish?
Thank you for the question. I've struggled with that question for years, and most recently in the last few years as we've seen the ballot initiatives in California and this problem becoming more and more on the surface in America. I believe that quotas are wrong. The reason why I believe them is that they harm the person who's quoted as much as it does everybody else. Because if someone is believed to have been quoted in, then no matter what achievements they may obtain, there's always the suspicion that that became possible because of some special favoritism. At the same time, for us conservatives to believe that everybody in America has an equal opportunity is pure foolishness. Is absolutely, it flies in the face of the facts. Several blocks from my home, there are young children who are born from single parents who sit in front of a television set for the first 5 or 6 years in their lives and then are dumped off somewhere. They don't have the same opportunity that my kids do. And so therefore, I believe that the United States government does have a role to play by programs that will provide all Americans on the level of economic basis to receive assistance and help to get on the level playing field with my kids. Programs that work, Head Start, other programs such as that. I think we've also got to develop additional programs such as opportunities for people to enter into businesses, public-private partnerships, which would provide the kind of training that people need. In my home state today, we have underemployment. We can't find people who are qualified to work at all the high-tech corporations that are throughout my state, and I'm sure the same is true here in Massachusetts. We should establish programs to train people so that they can achieve those goals. Achieve the opportunity to work and better themselves and their families. That goes to educational programs, in my view, and it goes to whether you want to call them small business programs or others. But we should develop a menu of programs that are government-sponsored, hopefully public and private partnerships, so that we can provide the opportunity for young men and women all over America to have the same opportunity as my kids do. And if we don't, then obviously we are facing the certainty of a dramatically divided society, as those who are able to compete in the workplace as it is more and more demanding in higher skills, and those who are left behind. And I would argue that that's probably, now that the Cold War is over, probably the greatest challenge that we face as a nation. And I applaud the President's dialogue on race, and I applaud all of the other initiatives that people are proposing, and maybe pretty soon it ought to be time to try some of them.
Senator McCain, my name is Noah Seaton. I'm a sophomore at the college, and I'd like to thank you for honoring us with your presence on campus tonight. I'm a Republican, and it's not too often that we see one of you here. But I'm going to ask one of those vastly hypothetical questions that only college students can come up with. If it were not a political poison pill tomorrow, what would be your view on the union dues issue?
I believe that Americans should be able to spend their salaries and their dues on whatever they choose to. But I want to point out, if I could, that when Senator Feingold, who is a very honest and decent young man, and I worked together, he had to give up certain fundamental beliefs that he had held very strongly, such as public funding, such as spending limits, because we had to make certain compromises. I would be glad to go to the floor tomorrow on a freestanding bill that says that every union member in America should not have to give up his or her dues without their permission. But the effect of this amendment, we all know, and that's why I have to be in opposition. Could I go back 1 second to the previous question? Because, again, I struggle over it. The reason why I oppose the English-only proposition is because it is exclusionary. Because there is no one in America that knows better the value and absolute criticality of knowing English than the immigrant. No one knows that better. And no one is more attuned to the requirements to get ahead by having knowledge of English. Spanish was spoken in my state first when it was carved out of the wilderness. We cherish our Hispanic heritage. We should nurture that. We should have not an English-only law, we should have an English plus law, an English plus adult education, plus bilingual programs at work, plus the furtherance and establishment of ways to continue and teach our kids in Arizona how wonderful our Hispanic heritage is. Rather than English only, as a party, we Republicans should expand English plus, and with the full recognition that the knowledge of English is the most important thing we can do. And again, on immigration, we Republicans are losing the Hispanic vote in droves because Hispanics believe that we're not just anti-illegal immigration, they believe we are anti-legal immigration. And legal immigration is the reason why America is has the strength and vitality that it does, that makes it different from every other nation. Again, I apologize for the long answer, but the question was important. Yes?
Hello, my name is Kia Coleman, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School, and thank you for coming to speak to us. The other day, I came across an older August article in Black Enterprise magazine, which was talking about how aspects of your reform bill would hinder the advancement of black legislators getting elected. I think Representative Clyburn said that aspects of the bill would reduce the number of black elected officials to a pitiful few. And that also goes for poorer legislators from poorer districts who depend on individual contributions to be elected. And I wanted to know if you could comment on those comments for me and give me your idea about how your reform would affect African American legislators.
Well, first of all, I would reject that notion, but I would also lament again the fact that most African-American legislators who get into office stay there forever without any competition ever again. And I think that's a terrible thing, because I think there should be competition amongst any ethnic or racial group of people. There should be competition. Now, perhaps you can blame the Republican Party for our failure to appeal to African Americans, and I will, if it makes you feel better, I'll take responsibility for that. But every African American member of the House of Representatives that I see is there forever as long as he or she wants to be, and I think that's unfortunate, because then they lose touch with their constituents as well. There's no opposition. There's no opposition. They're reelected with 80, 90% of the vote. And again, if you want to blame that on Republicans, that's okay. But I'm a little puzzled by their concern, saying that they couldn't stay in office when basically they're the ones that stay in office longer than anyone. Second of all, I understand, though, that they feel that they would have to raise more money from a poor area, poor economic area, than people from more affluent areas. I would like to see them raise some money from their districts, some money. And I would like to see the original McCain-Feingold bill, which required people to raise 60% of their money from their own districts or states, because I think that now when we have most of our money coming from someplace else, that it's wrong. I just don't accept that argument, and I think that it's the one thing we need in every congressional district in every state in America is more competition rather than less. And right now, there is no competition. So I'm not sure how that could get much worse in my view. Oh, I'm sorry. Last question. Yes, sir. I'll make the answer brief.
Okay.
Could I make 4 brief answers? Real quick answers. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Bo Breeze. I'm a freshman from California at the college. And it's obvious that you're very concerned about the ineffectiveness that we as American citizens perceive our government has in addressing the needs of America as a whole. One of the causes of that is obviously the campaign financing and the influence of PACs and other organizations in getting votes approved for pork barrel programs. But what about pork barrel programs that are better for the constituents of an individual representative and are hidden in a bill as an obscure provision, but on the whole hurt the American people?
Well, that's why we fought so long for the line item veto, and I'm very proud of the President of the United States who exercised it today. He didn't exercise. We recommended 123 projects, and he only line item vetoed 38, but he's off on the right foot. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very important. And this goes along with this syndrome that this isn't the taxpayers' money, it's my money, so I can do whatever I want to with it. There's got to be a fair process: hearings, authorization, appropriation, and competition and merit. And that's the only way we can spend their money. My favorite of all the appropriations that I ever saw was the time we spent $2 million to study the effect on the ozone layer of flatulence in cows. Yes, sir. Real quick.
Good evening, Senator. My name is Daniel Suleman. I'm a junior at the college. Your bill will get rid of large soft money contributions to political parties, but it will also leave open the door for millionaires and billionaires to privately fund their own campaigns. Fortunately, or unfortunately, however you look at it, we've seen these campaigns fail so far in the case of Huffington, Ross Perot, Steve Forbes. But these campaigns are mounting, including current gubernatorial candidate in California. And given how much money is needed to mount a successful campaign today, I wonder how you feel about this aspect of your bill.
Full disclosure, and we tried to put in some modest provisions in this bill that if a person spent over $50,000 of his or her own money, then they couldn't pay it back. As you know, a lot of millionaires get elected and then they hold the fundraisers and raise it back. And also that they would not be eligible for the so-called coordinated funds, which comes from the party. But when you get somebody who is worth billions and doesn't care, I don't know the answer except full disclosure and rely on the good sense of the American people. I don't know how to attack that, to tell you the truth, but we could discourage some of the millionaires who might be a little stingy. Yes, sir. And then
Good evening, Senator. Tony Ziegler. Afterwards, may I briefly discuss a PR film for the Air Force concerning a squadron at Luke? Since you are on the Armed Forces Committee, would I seek information as far as approaching the Air Force to get this feature made?
Good. I'd be glad to.
Thank
I'd
you.
be glad to. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Last question.
I'd like to thank you for coming here today, Senator. I think the enterprise you're undertaking is a very honorable one. But McCain-Feingold only takes care of campaign finance reform at the federal level, not for those people running for a governor or a state legislator or even for city council. And my question for you is, what do you think can or should be done about campaign finance reform at the local and state levels, particularly for those states without initiative and referendum?
11 states in the last election enacted some kinds of campaign finance reform. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Our efforts, though, also have to be somewhat connected so that all the money just didn't flow into a state party coffer, which then funded a political campaign. And our bill says that that kind of money can only go to voter registration and get out the vote efforts. But I think you're going to be very pleased to see on the next time around a number of additional states with campaign finance reform initiatives, and one who believes in most of the power should be in the states. I'd like to see how that tracks before we start working on some federal solution to it. Frankly, one of the reasons why the senators from Maine are as involved as they are is because they had a very, very vigorous campaign finance reform initiative passed in Maine, and it has motivated some of the federal, and the other states motivated the federal officials to do the same. I want to thank you for this kind opportunity of being with you. You've been a very wonderful audience, and I want you to come out to Arizona and visit. We take all plastic, and we'd love to see you out there. Thank you very much.